welcome back to the Joy of Medicine. I'm Trey Cashion, and I'm sitting here with my dad, Dr. Richard Cashion, and Caleb's on the board back there. So thanks for being here, Caleb,
yes.
and helping. And so, again, we're going to continue to do it, and as frequently, because I love hearing the stories. Dad has remembered quite a few of them, and there was one that stuck out with regard to something that happened right after you moved to Houston, and what happened with that? What happened with that story?
Well, they built the Houston Medical Center with all these concrete and stuff, and I guess they really didn't think too much about the fact it can rain in Houston. And
it can't rain in Houston. I grew up there. When does it not rain in Houston?
Well, anyway, it was my first year at Methodist Hospital. This is like 1976, so that's a couple of years ago. And we used to have to go out to a place called the Annex, which was about half a mile from where the hospital was. And they would admit they had so many patients in the hospital. And back then, Methodist Hospital was over 1,000 beds.
Wow.
And they were admitting people at the Annex and get them stabilized and then bring them to the hospital on the main campus. So as a young whippersnapper, and I was the guy that got all the incoming, so to speak. And so I went to go out to the Annex one day, and it was raining, and there was about 2 or 3 feet of water everywhere on the streets. Like Fannin Street was flooded. I mean, totally. You could. So I went in, and the lady that was the director of admissions, they said next to Dr. DeBakey, she was the most powerful person at Methodist Hospital, Mrs. Young. I said, Ms. Young, I can't get out of the Annex. There's a flood. She said, son, it does not flood here. And I said, Ms. Young, please come with me. So I took her by the hand, and we walked out the front door, and she looked out the front door, and she said, my God, it's a flood. So anyway, that was the start of it. Well, it turns out that it was when they built Methodist Hospital, they were worried about tornadoes, that if there was a major event that would shut the hospital down, it would be a tornado that would hit things. So they put all the emergency power in the second basement. So that's down like 20 feet in the ground where the emergency power is. So the water from Fannin Street, and back in those days, they now have floodgates to keep this from happening. But this was before they knew that. So what happened was the water from Fannin Street and the other streets went into the basement came into the hospital, and was like a siphon.
Says the New York Times article about it, written in 1976.
Right.
12 inches of rainfall. Yeah. The basement was 6 feet underwater.
Yeah, it was. Wow. And guess what? Dr. DeBakey's car was floating around in the garage. And it was like amazing. So this is a heart hospital. Dr. DeBakey, there were like 12 open heart surgeries going on simultaneously when the power went out. Wow. So what happened was the city power went out, which you might expect. Well, guess what? The emergency power kicked on, and 2 minutes later it went out. So there was absolutely no power going on at Methodist Hospital. It had 12 operating rooms. He had a 50-bed, that people don't believe this, but this, if you look it up, it was there 50-bed ICU at Methodist Hospital, all cardiovascular patients, of which we were responsible for, and there was no power. They were all on ventilators. So I remember what we did. We called the medical school, Baylor up, and said, get all the medical students over here. And we assigned a medical student at each one of the beds to, if you remember, there's an ambu bag, which is, you've seen people being breathed that have a tube in place. Well, all these people had tubes in place because they were on ventilators, but the machines weren't going to work. So we had to get all these medical students assigned to each bed and take shifts and whatever, so they would breathe, for the patient they were on.
So they're attaching to the tube, and then
so they're hand ventilating because the power was out. You couldn't electrically. Well, in the midst of all this, if nothing else can go wrong, remember these are post-op heart patients. Well, one of the things that can happen after you've had heart surgery, it's called cardiac tamponade, when there's bleeding in the chest and it compresses the heart to where the heart no longer works. And that is absolutely a medical emergency. You've got to correct that like now, or they're going to be dead within a matter of a couple of minutes. And so one of the post-op patients had cardiac tamponade. And what can you do? Normally, you'd bring him back to the operating room, but it was so urgent, such a problem. So here we were, by nighttime now, we had flashlights. So we're all holding flashlights while the surgeon is opening the chest with the guy is out. They're giving him pain medicine and whatnot, but they open up his chest. So we're in the operating room, not the OR, in the ICU, chest fully open to relieve this cardiac tamponade and then close it up. It was an amazing experience. I had a patient that came in the midst of all this. Somehow he got to Methodist Hospital emergency room. He had an acute myocardial infarction, heart attack. There's no elevator, and it doesn't work. And the ICU at that time was on the second floor. So we had to carry the guy up. We had a bunch of people to carry him up to the ICU. We got up to the ICU. Guess what? The monitors don't work. Nothing works. But he was in the ICU, and there was no air conditioning.
Oh my
so
gosh.
This guy, it's really amazing, after about 12 hours in that place with no air conditioning, he said, I don't care if I die, I'm getting out of here. So he literally got up and walked out of the hospital with myocardial infarction.
Wow.
I mean, it was like, you cannot imagine what was going on. We were having to, but anyway, the Army Corps of Engineers arrived with their big generators and stuff, and they got power up and everything. But there was a period of time, I can't remember exactly how many hours it was, but it was, I would say 12 hours before we had significant power to do all this stuff. So all the medical students were up. I was up all night. We were up working with all these people, and it was an amazing experience. And I can tell you for a fact there were a lot of prayers gone down during that time.
I can't imagine. I mean, nothing is working as it's supposed to. So was everybody eventually okay? Did anybody, as a result of that?
Well, I don't. It's hard. Yeah, all the people in the OR that we had to take, they all survived and did well. But the medical students and everything were all very busy, as I was, running around trying to get all this stuff taken care of. But it was an amazing situation that, you think about disasters that occur, and we've obviously heard disasters recently about the fire in
Maui.
In Maui. Yeah.
Caleb
just gave, that's looking out the front door of Methodist Hospital. That's what I was looking at. Cars underwater. That's right.
He just pulled up some pictures of what it was like.
Yeah.
So
anyway,
wow.
it was a crazy, crazy situation. And obviously your mother at home knew there was a flood, and so I couldn't get home. And we didn't have mobile phones in those days.
No, I know.
The phones are out, so I was trapped down there. She didn't know what the heck was going on. And
wow.
We were totally separated from the world. It was crazy.
Well, thank God for people that'll just drop everything. It kind of shows the level of care and concern for people who have who if you don't do something, they're going to die, right? I mean, if you're not breathing for them and they've been on a ventilator, the fact that people dropped everything, medical students, everybody, and came it
really was an amazing event, and it goes to show you, and I think the country has showed this in many emergencies like 9/11 and all that stuff, that in fact when there is a disaster, the human spirit is to go to the disaster and help.
Right.
And so we had, but it's interesting, nobody could get to the hospital because of the flood. So it was all, the school, Baylor Medical School, was just across the street. And I can remember, it's really funny, our office was across the street in those days. It subsequently was in Scurlock Tower. But so we we took our shoes off and walked across the street to get to the office over there where we stayed for that night.
Wow.
But I mean, the water across Fannin Street was not quite waist deep, but it was close to it. And it was totally, I remember Dr. Chapman, who was the head guy, he's a very tall guy. And so he, and his skinny legs as mine are, and holding his shoes, walking across Fannin Street in this flood.
Wow.
It's amazing.
Well, yeah, no, it's one of those things where you kind of wonder, with regard to joy in the midst of a disaster, really, with people's lives on the line, and the like, as you mentioned, kind of the human spirit to kind of come together. And I think I'm when I see something or hear something about that, I know God's in control of everything, and how does that happen? But like you said, I think one of the things that I think sometimes God wants to reveal, which should give us some joy, even in the midst of those struggles, is the fact of how willing people are to run to the problem, because that's what that at the basis of what medicine is, and really what human life is you've got suffering that comes, harm that can come, and that's allowed, I believe, so that God can draw out of people something that they may not, if it hadn't been run to as urgently. But then when it becomes very apparent, so out of that, he actually reveals to each one of us, those medical students, I'm sure, were forever changed as a result of how to do that. I mean, I'm thinking, having to sit there and squeeze to help a person breathe over time would begin
if you
to
remember,
hurt at some
certainly
point.
About 12 times a minute, and you got to keep it going. You can't quit.
But I think that's a general way of looking at what should flow in terms of joy when something happens that's out of the ordinary, life-threatening, which is going to happen more frequently in what you do than what I do. I mean, with rare exception, nothing that I do is a life or death situation.
Not life or death, but somebody might lose their house or something.
Right,
this is pretty serious.
That usually takes time, and we have time to work on those type of things. But with medicine, I think what's happening is, you have these opportunities, and to see that it's the bringing of everything we have for the sake of another, and that suffering that necessarily happens. They wouldn't be coming to a doctor if it wasn't for, on the low end, a cold, sniffles, or whatever, on the upper end, a heart attack.
And so sometimes there's a little humor in all this.
Yeah.
There was a guy named Larry Mathis, who was the ultimate CEO at Methodist. Well, he was like me, a newbie. He was new at his job. They had just dug the basement for Scurlock Tower. Remember, that's where my office was, Scurlock Tower. So it was a 2-story deep hole with nothing in it, and the water coming down filled up the toe. Well, Larry couldn't get to the hospital, so guess what he did? He was in a canoe, and he was paddling the canoe, and he realized all of a sudden that this going over into this thing, only we had to bail out and get out. But it was crazy. But several people came to work in canoes.
Wow! But like I said, it's that running to a place that you would not run to in the circumstances unless there was human life on the other side, and the need to help humans. I think that's got to be at the center of kind of some of the joy. And most of the stories you've told have been, how can I help? What can I do? There's sacrifice, right? I mean, we could be doing any of a number of things. There's love. Hopefully that's, what's driving that I need to give myself for the sake of these others. And that in any trial, especially when it's out of the ordinary, because I think we do rely on technology even more today than they were
more now,
years ago.
Much more now, but in fact, it was a lot of hands-on doing things because there were no machines. But that's the amazing thing about this kind of a problem. All the new equipment wouldn't work because there was no electricity.
Right. So I guess now they've fixed that down there and in other places.
Yeah, now they have the generator up on the second floor.
Wow.
So but it was 2 stories down. So it took the Army Corps of Engineers came, and they got all these pumps going, and you could hear the motors. Like you hear the generators, and people are running their generators out of their house. They had I don't know how many generators going. The Army Corps of Engineers to pump out all the water And it took
Wow.
them several days to get all the water out.
How long did it take to get the electricity back on?
It was not it was probably 24 hours before they really got it all back. I
So
don't
were they
remember
having
the-
to? Were they literally having to?
Yeah, we
to
had
do
shifts.
the-
We had
do
shifts.
the-
People doing, coming and helping to like breathe for people, and a lot of the times the post-op patients, you can get them. We call it extubated when the breathing tube comes out, and so you could get a lot of those people extubated and they're breathing on their own and
Wow.
doing fine. It's just in the immediate post-operative phase that
Yeah, you had
that's the
to-
problem.
you had
Where they're just right after anesthesia.
Yeah, so I think I mean, when I think of something like that, number one, we rely on. I think it kind of unveils a little bit. I mean, we rely on all this technology to do things, and it's great that we have it. But the true greatness, I think, is in the human element.
Mhm.
I mean, the care, the concern, and the willingness to kind of let go of everything and say, it's now time for me to go and do it. I mean, there's nothing really, I think, exciting about, having to squeeze 12 times a minute to help somebody breathe, other than there's a human on the other side of it. And if I don't do it, then they're not going to be able to breathe for themselves.
Right.
And so that human element is something that we need to kind of focus on and make sure that that we all remember that, the technology is really extraneous. I mean, it's central. We got to have it, and it's great that we have it, but it's the humanness of this that matters.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And obviously it was, we were very fortunate, and there's been a lot written. You can look it up on the internet. I think Caleb actually pulled some of this stuff up, but it's available. It was an amazing story. What they did, just so people will be relieved, they developed dams. They were like 3 foot high of dams that all the entrances to the hospital could be blocked off. And so whenever there was a flood at Methodist Hospital, and the other hospitals did the same thing, they would put these dams in place, and they were like a metal, rubber and metal would fit in a slot, and so would block it off. And so that they did that, and so it doesn't happen anymore. Sometimes water gets up there, but it won't go through these dams.
wow.
Yeah,
Well,
yes.
thank
So-
God for human ingenuity and everybody working and making sure they have it done. And anyway, I know this is a shorter one, but I'd never heard that story before. When I was 11 at the time.
Yeah.
And so I don't remember that.
I couldn't get home that night, so I didn't see you that night.
Yeah. We probably were doing everything we could during the day to block the
And there's probably a home flood.
Yeah,
so-
we had. I remember times of going, and Mom was like, "I can't believe you're swimming in that." But I mean, it would flood on the streets, and we'd go play. So we weren't aware of, and we're probably having fun at home. But thank God for the doctors and the nurses and everybody and the medical students who all were there during that time. So we're going to end with that. Hope you enjoyed that. I think that was it was something I hadn't heard before, but I'm grateful for all that the people did. 20, 30, 50 years ago?
Almost,
Goodness gracious,
yeah,
a long time
long
ago.
time ago.
All right.
I can't believe I'm this old.
Neither can I. Believe that I'm this old either. But anyway, God bless you guys. Thank you for listening to Joy of Medicine, watching the Joy of Medicine, and we'll be back soon. God bless.